major doctrine or teaching in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is the concept of Zion. In fact, of course, one of our articles of faith declares we believe in the literal gathering of Israel and in the restoration of the 10 tribes, that Zion, the New Jerusalem, will be built upon the American continent, that Christ will reign personally upon the earth, and that the earth will be renewed and receive its paradisical glory. Well, like any doctrine or teaching of Joseph Smith, that's developmental. Zion itself is mentioned 42 times in the Book of Mormon, 27 of them in 2nd Nephi, principally the Isaiah chapters. But there are two chapters in the Book of Mormon that are almost devoted exclusively to the concept of Zion. The first one is 3rd Nephi 21, where Jesus tells the Nephites about in the latter days, when the Book of Mormon comes forth, there will be, that will mark the beginning of the establishment of Zion. But the other one is in Ether chapter 13, particularly the first 13 verses, when Ether says he saw, or his visionary understanding or prophetic understanding of the concept of Zion would be on the American continent. These chapters had to play a big part in Joseph Smith's early understanding, that this land is not only chosen, but the latter-day New Jerusalem, or Zion, will be built and established before Jesus comes again. And Joseph saw himself as the individual that he thought, in his mind, would actually make that happen. So he is going to, especially those early years of the restoration, Zion is his clarion call. How do we establish Zion? Zion has kind of multiple meaning, and you can draw that from the scriptures. But first of all, we know as Latter-day Saints that Enoch himself established Zion. That's where it originates, in this amazing city of saints that he was able to establish, in which there was no poor. They were all of one heart, one mind. So Zion is an actual place anciently. In Joseph Smith's mind, at least initially or early, Zion was this community of believers who, in working together cooperatively and in harmony with the principles and teachings of the gospel, could create a Zion-like community, just like Enoch. And those first months of 1830, the church is getting off the ground. We're getting converts. We're getting people who believe in the message of the Book of Mormon. And clearly, Joseph's preaching Book of Mormon. This is the new book, and he's going to highlight what he thinks is important. And it's clear in my mind that Joseph Smith is talking about Zion. And I think this kind of catches on with some of the early saints, and we can kind of assume that it did, especially with Hiram Page, one of the 8 witnesses to the Book of Mormon. Of course, he claims to receive these revelations in behalf of the church, and Joseph has to kind of nip this one in the bud. But what's interesting is in the revelation directed to the Hiram Page problem, Oliver Cowdery, of course, we know, felt like Page's revelations were legitimate. And in countering that fact that it isn't, or that they weren't, the Lord reveals section 28 of the Doctrine and Covenants. And there he tells Oliver, you've kind of messed up a little bit here, Oliver, but I'm going to send you on a mission to the Lamanites. And the location of the Lamanites is near the borders of where Zion is to be located. In fact, that's why he says in the Revelation to Hiram Page, or to the church, that no man knoweth where Zion is to be located, but I tell you hereafter, it is on the borders by the Lamanites. So now they're actually understanding that their location was or has been predetermined by God, or by the Lord. And in Joseph's mind, or any Latter-day Saint for that matter, at that period of time, since the Native Americans were being removed west of Missouri, in their mind, this is a clear indication Zion's located on the borders of the American frontier. It's in western Missouri. And so now they even have more understanding as of September 1830 from that revelation. Shortly after Oliver Cowdery leaves with the mission of the Lamanites, Joseph's still been engaged for several months in the translation of the Bible. And in what is today Moses chapter 6 and Moses chapter 7, we have a number of verses that talk about Enoch, this great ancient patriarch. If you look in Genesis chapter 4 and 5 of the Bible, there's 8 verses on Enoch. And Joseph, beginning in Moses 6, continuing through Moses 7, actually Moses chapter 8, verse 1. By my count, there's 115 verses on Enoch and how he achieved Zion, how he was slow of speech, takes this city, and they became of one heart and one mind, and eventually God took the city unto himself. And now Joseph knows, I need to do this, or I need to do my very best to establish Zion. So the Joseph Smith translation plays a key role in Joseph Smith's developmental understanding of the concept of Zion. In January of 1831, Joseph Smith relocates in Kirtland, Ohio, and in the next few months, the 3 branches of the church from New York also relocate in the Kirtland area. Once they have all assembled, they have a conference there at the farm property of Isaac Morley, just east of Kirtland, during the first week of June. As that conference is coming to an end, Joseph Smith gets a revelation. It's section 52 of the Doctrine and Covenants. And in the opening verses, Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon are told to go to Missouri, and then there the Lord would reveal unto him and Sidney the land of their inheritance. I'll reveal where Zion's going to be. So I think Joseph's pretty excited about it. He says, you go down there and hold a conference. It's in the first few verses of section 52. And then 13 additional companionships are instructed to go down there and also go to Missouri, and Joseph and the church is to hold a conference there.
Joseph and his party left immediately for Missouri, arriving in July 1831.
On the 20th of July, 1831, he receives what is today section 57 of the Doctrine and Covenants. And it's a landmark revelation for the Joseph Smith's understanding of Zion. In the opening verses, the Lord commends them for obeying the commandment to come down. It's quite a trek of 900 miles. And then he says that Independence is the center place of Zion. This is where Zion is to be located. And then he says, and the spot for the temple is lying on a lot not far from the courthouse. They dedicate the land of Zion on August 2nd, and then on August 3rd, Joseph Smith actually dedicates a site just west of Independence, and there on August 3rd, he and several other men assembled, and a dedicatory prayer was offered. Following day, they have a conference, August 4th, and then within a matter of 5 days, he begins the return trip. Between 1831 and 1833, Latter-day Saints begin to relocate in Jackson County with the full expectation that they are laying the foundation of Zion, that they're beginning that process of establishing this holy community, this holy city. During the month of June 1833, Joseph Smith and the First Presidency, Sidney Rigdon, Frederick G. Williams, and probably others, began to actually come up with some plans for the city of Zion and the temple there. And by June 25th, 1833, they've completed their first set of drawings of not only the layout of their concept of Zion, but also a temple concept in terms of a design and structure. In the initial drawing, the First Presidency, the church leaders, crafted it to kind of illustrate a mile square plat of land. And In this plat, there's 42 square blocks, but in the center portion, there is 7 blocks that are 15 acres in size, and in the 42, they are all 10 acres. They're alternate facing in the outer 10-acre blocks. Each block is divided into 20 half acres. So the idea is to have 20 families per block on each half acre of the 10-acre block. The houses were designated to be, or instructed to be, 25 feet off the street, so there was space between the dwelling and also the street. And they were to be built of stone and or brick. So kind of a very detailed plat. They anticipated that this 1 square mile plat would actually house about 15,000 people. They said 15 to 20,000. Well, to do that, there's 976 lots. That would mean there was 15 people per household. So they were a little bit underestimating the fact that this probably wouldn't be large enough. But the centerpiece of this City of Zion concept or plat was, again, in the middle of the design was 3 major blocks, 15 acres apiece, 2 of them to have 24 houses of worship, and 1 of them to be inclusive of storehouses, bishop's property. When Partridge gets this, Edward Partridge, the bishop, he's probably going, oh my gosh, this is really something here. How are we to do this? So there's no real instructions about how we're going to begin to develop this concept. But I think what probably amazed him the most is what Joseph Smith is now suggesting. We won't have 1 house of worship, we'll have 24. And they were, of course, designated by quorums and so on and so forth. 3 for the deacons, 3 for the teachers, so on. But fortunately, Joseph Smith crossed out or put an X in figure number 5 or building number 5, temple number 5, and said, that's the building you build first. Start with that one, a house for the presidency. There is no portion of any of this plat that for agricultural production. That's all on the outside of the city, except you could have gardens and so on and so forth on your individual property. The streets are much wider, 132 feet. This is not a narrow carriageway. This is a broad street for commerce, traffic, that kind of thing. This entire plat is in the handwriting of Frederick G. Williams, as well as the map itself. It's in color.
Shortly after the first plat, in August 1833, the first presidency sent a revised plat for the City of Zion.
So with this expanded plat of 1.5 miles square, it brought the total number of lots to 2,600, and that would have brought the number of people per lot down to a little over 8 persons per square lot. So this matched the concept a little bit more of the projected figures of how many people would occupy this area of 1.5 miles square. But I think anyone who comes to Utah, that there's this kind of grid pattern that we've kind of inherited from Joseph Smith and the early church in terms of the Utah communities and the wide streets. So there's a remnant of this City of Zion concept in Utah, particularly even to this day. Again, primarily because of Brigham Young and community development that he would have been used to, or at least understood from Joseph Smith.
Joseph Smith and his brethren believed that the second coming of Jesus Christ was imminent, thus making the building up of the City of Zion urgent.
So for them, and Joseph Smith, this is number one. We've got to establish, we got to find out where, and we've got to live righteously, keep the commandments, obey the revelations, and the Lord will direct us in how to establish Zion. Unfortunately, of course, in 1833, the Latter-day Saints experienced extreme persecution and were ultimately forced to leave Jackson County, basically abandoned their property. Most moved into Clay County. This was followed, of course, with an attempt to try to redeem Zion, to get it back by the Army of Israel, or the Camp of Israel. Today we know we could refer to it as Zion's Camp, which also ultimately was not successful. I certainly think the Lord knew and understood. I mean, he knows all, that these things would happen and that Zion would not be established. But I think it's significant that these people really in the early sections of the Doctrine and Covenants are honored, or should be honored, for attempting to lay the foundation of Zion. Did they get it? No. Did they understand a little bit more what they needed to do? Yes. Do we now understand a little bit more maybe what the future holds for Zion? I think the answer is yes, too. I think although they had hoped and wished and prayed and fell short in some ways, by trying themselves to do it, was all the Lord fully expected. So, although again, we may see ultimately they failed in their attempt, just by doing it, they became more holy, or more righteous, more obedient, more tempered people. So that's our aim today. We may not establish Zion in our time, but that doesn't mean we don't try to establish a community of believers and people and a group of Latter-day Saints who try their very best to live a Zion life. And that's my aim: a Zion home, a Zion ward, Zion stake, a Zion community. There's nothing wrong with trying, even though it may not be fulfilled in our lifetime.
The loss of Zion in Missouri deeply affected members of the church. However, January 1841, the Lord gave a revelation that surely ministered some comfort.
It starts in verse 49 of section 124. Verily, verily, I say unto you, that when I give a commandment to any of the sons of men to do a work unto my name, and those sons of men go with all their might, and with all they have to perform that work, and cease not their diligence, and their enemies come upon them, and hinder them from performing that work, behold, it behoveth me to require that work no more at the hands of those sons of men, but to accept of their offerings. Now I'm skipping to verse 51. Therefore, for this cause have I accepted the offerings of those whom I commanded to build up a city and a house unto my name in Jackson County, Missouri, and were hindered by your enemies, saith the Lord your God. Don't worry about Missouri. Let's build a temple community here in Nauvoo. And of course, we're going to get moved from that too. So we come to the west, and what do? We build a temple community. Maybe we could call it a temporary Zion, with Salt Lake as the headquarters. And that will be the headquarters until, I guess, the Lord establishes Zion in its fullness, in its actual location. The Lord will come again. There will be a city established at the locality he has designated, and you just can't get around that. Now, how's that going to happen? I have no clue. I have a few ideas, but I think we can safely say that when the Savior comes again, he will come to a place in Jackson County, Missouri, Independence being the center place. It hasn't moved out of its space. I mean, they're designated by Joseph Smith, and it will happen.